All right, following off of the heels of last year's pretty good album, we get a new one from Galahad. I wasn't expecting one, and yeah, I just wanted to check them out a couple days ago, and I was like, oh, they have a full new album out. Let's check it out. So let's do exactly that.
I don't know what I've ever done. I don't know where I've come.
The Long Goodbye by Galahad. So Galahad is a neo-progressive rock band from England. Yeah, they're English. And much like the neo-prog band, they got their start in the mid-'80s. And yeah, I think for Galahad, though, they really didn't get the traction, again, much like a lot of neo-prog bands, until like the mid-2000s, like 2003, 4, 5, 6. I first heard about them with Empires Never Last, and I think that's where a lot of people really fell into the band and had been following them. And Empires Never Last still is one of my all-time favorite neo-prog albums. I know that they also got a little bit of acclaim with their 1995 album of Sleepers. I know that one comes up every once in a while. But yeah, for me it was the 1-2 punch of Year Zero and Empires Never Last. And they've had hit and misses, you know. I felt like Quiet Storms was a little bit of a miss. The Seas of Change, though, was an absolute hit. I did feel as if the last album of The Last Great Adventurer was fine, but the more I listen, like, it's classic Galahad, right? My first 2 or 3 spins I loved, and I loved the album. It was really fun to get back into the groove, get back into the swing of things. But after that, it was kind of like a piece of juicy fruit gum, in that once the flavor wore off, I wasn't all that excited. And, you know, I came into this one wondering, are we going to get some more of the same in that case? And unfortunately, we kind of do. Upon my first handful of listens, I found myself loving this album. I love the styles. I love the energy. We got the classic tropes of the neo-prog, you know, very operatic, very melodramatic. But we have the soaring guitar works and the dueling keyboards in that sense. We have longer stretches of jam sessions in there with the big buildups and payoffs that are kind of all swarming around that. The gang's all here in that sense, but after you kind of digest those hallmarks, what you're left with is just kind of a stereotypical Galahad album at that point. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that this album is a complete write-off, you know? Like, I wanted to get my criticisms out of the gate, like, taken care of. Now, I can gush about the things that I loved about this album. You know, it has outstanding Galahad tracks on here. The mid track of The Righteous and the Damned is one of the best Galahad tracks that I've heard since Empires Never Last. You know, it has this fantastic build up. It lays out the atmosphere. It feels like you're walking through a Victorian evening streets, you know, like the steam and the mist and the smoke from the city are starting to enwrap around you as you're walking through the streets. And you get punched in the face with this aggressive, energetic, larger than life sounds of music in that sense. I just find myself coming back to that track over and over again. And that leads us into the larger track of The Long Goodbye, the title track, which again, 13 minutes of just pure, unadulterating, like unfettered and uncompromising prog, neo-prog. And this will itch the scratch for anybody that's looking for some really good neo-prog, because honestly, this year we haven't had a whole lot of them. But I'm definitely getting ahead of myself here. The album opens up with the first track of Behind the Veil of a Smile, and we have this kind of like I want to say retro, but like retro gaming. Like this, the soundtrack itself sounds like it could be coming from like a Sega Genesis, you know, from like Vector Man, for anybody that remembers that from the 16-bit era. Man, I just love the rhythm styles. I love the root of this track, of how infectious and how grooving it is. And that leads us into the second track of Everything's Changed. And once again, we have those really deep and grooving sounds that are met with a amazing atmosphere But what really stands out for this track is that keyboard solo. And it wouldn't be a neo-prog album if we didn't have an outstanding keyboard solo. And near the, latter half of this track, we have just an amazing, fun keyboard part that I just get so happy listening to. And then that's continued on with Shadow in the Corner, which again is an amazing driven track. I've already talked about the next two albums, Righteous and the Damned and The Long Goodbye. The only problem is after these two tracks, which really feel like the kind of crowning jewel of the album, the last two tracks of Darker Days and Open Waters are just kind of left to the wayside. It almost feels like the album has cut them out by the knees and they're like, well, these are the last two tracks and we'll just kind of let them graze over there in the field, which is a real shame because Darker Days has like the main rhythm style. It really is coming from the keyboards in that effect. And again, that 16-bit soundscapes, I immediately wanted to plug in my old Sega Genesis and play some like Subterranea or Vector Man, getting those like really funky soundscapes in that case. And it's got that kind of driven force that I've been mentioning all throughout this. The chorus work on this track is just so catchy. I can't help but sing along to Darker Days Are Here. I always want to say it's here again, but it's like Here to Stay or something along those lines. But it just gets right into you and it works its magic. And honestly, the last track on here, Open Water, yeah, it's a little bit of a dud. It kind of ends on the weakest track, even though it is the shortest track. It's more of like a ballad, and I understand that this was the track that they wanted to kind of end things off with, but I don't know. In my mind, it's a little bit of a lackluster, like it goes out with a whimper rather than a bang, and with all of the energy that came before this, I was really excited for some, like, get up and go final hurrah. Like, if they had ended with Darker Days, I think we would have had a superior album on our hand. But yeah, Open Waters is fine, but it is the weakest track off of this album. So in the end, The Long Goodbye from Galahad, again, the first handful of listens, I thoroughly loved my time with it. It was bumping, it was driven, it was like everything that I wanted from Galahad. But once I kind of digested that, I don't know, it didn't quite hit me with that same energy and that same oomph, and I felt the same thing with The Great Adventure from last year as well. Now, that's not saying that this album might not have stay power. Like, who knows? I might put this on the shelf and revisit it in a couple months, and I might get just as much excitement out of it. But like for the time being, I feel like I've worked myself into diminishing returns. Like I'm listening to this album and I'm not getting that same kind of excitement that I first heard on my first couple of listens on it. But my final rating for this album is a positive one. I will say The Long Goodbye from Galahad is still one that I would download. You can find far worse neo-prog albums that came out this year, and this one was still a lot of fun. I would actually recommend it. I think that this is a great introduction for the band. It's definitely a little bit further away from Empires Never Last and The Sea of Change, but it's still a fantastic album and one that I would recommend checking out. So that's my thoughts for The Long Goodbye by Galahad. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. Because yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.